Hello and welcome back to Story Time. I am Dani Brown, the Queen of Filth, or Queenie as I prefer, because my ex invented the Queen of Filth and just created this horrible fictional character. It's just you, basically. And this week we are back with Night is Falling by Amanda M Lyons. Now, she sent me two. I went with this one first because when she first revealed this novel with the cover, I just fell in love with the cover. It is just so amazing, and I just haven't read this book. Now, I know Amanda M Lyons because she used to work at JEA, who used to publish my books before they closed down, and I think she might have edited Ketamine Addicted Pandas. I'm not sure. She edited quite a few of my novels, which I have reissued most of them. Sorry, my makeup is just so smudgy. It's because it's cheap. I bought it because it's very pretty and bright, but it's not the best makeup in the world. I should probably go to Urban Decay and get some proper makeup. But yeah, so Amanda used to basically edit some of my books, and I always liked her short stories and stuff. I've never read an entire novel. Now, I'm not going to read all of what she sent me of this because it's just too much. But let's get started on Night is Falling by Amanda M Lyons. So I think I showed you the cover. Let's see if I can. I'm still learning how to edit, but I will try and flash the cover up somewhere. Right. How do I turn the page on this? It's not turning. There it goes. Chapter 1. It all started so quietly that even Bobby Jean questioned himself. But in his heart of hearts, he knew he wasn't wrong, and being right could be very dangerous indeed. The woods were heavy with the weight of something new, something that seemed as if it breathed in all the air and let it drift out again changed. The weight of the forest's familiar silence had grown more and more overpowering every day, becoming somehow both quieter and more inhabited with each passing moment. Bobby Jean went out into the trees and tried to pin down just what it was that had happened while he wasn't watching and listening, trying to cue into the differences enough to figure out what it was that had shifted and become wrong. But none of these shapes made any sense on the surface. Wasn't he always listening? Shouldn't he have heard it, felt it, sensed it as it came? Bobby Jean, as in tune with those woods as he was with his own body, they were all connected after all. He'd been born under those trees, smelling this air. It was a little like waking up to find your head full of fever and pain when you'd gone to bed the night before feeling perfectly fine. That level of dysphoria and intense discomfort that climbs inside of you and stays an unrelenting pall over everything. It started with a certain feeling on waking up, a weight to the air, like there was something with him. Maybe somewhere nearby, the weight of some presence, and the equal weight of eyes on him from somewhere outside gave him pause. He waited for some change in the location he picked up on, a shift of motion that might tell him more about this presence if he listened hard enough. He stayed flat in his bed for a long moment, and then carefully slid up for a better range of vision. His arms propped him into a half-sitting position, with his palms planted just beyond his hips. His body rigid, he fought exhaustion to determine what had disturbed him enough to pop out of a dead sleep. His head felt wrong, too, like cotton wool had been packed between his brain and the hollows of his skull. It couldn't have been sleep clinging to him, but that didn't feel right either. Bobby Jean sniffed a little, trying to figure out if he was sick and find his facilities. He didn't look out of the windows. That seemed foolish and somehow risky at the moment. What if there really was something there, and looking at it made it come at him? Could it be just a deer? Nothing had changed, not even the presence. Maybe he should go back to bed. He was drowsy enough they might just slip off if he waited long enough. He breathed in and out in slow patterns as he listened for a few more seconds, and then the breaths expanded out, becoming more even as his mind started to drift. His eyelids slipped closed soon after, and he drifted off in microdoses of sleep for several minutes. But he remained aware of that presence, even though his tiredness and darted awake every time he came close to drifting deeper. Instead of changing, the feeling persisted exactly as it was, Alarmed but still tired, he paused to evaluate the situation again. He didn't look through the windows, could barely get his head to stay up through his drowsiness, but it was clear enough by the light that came through the windows from outside, the numerals of the alarm clock, that he woken up very early in the morning, before true dawn. His eyes wouldn't focus enough for him to register the actual time, but he could see the AM clearly enough. It was still dark, the pale edges of morning light, just a ghost hinting at daylight. And nothing beyond the feeling of being watched felt dangerous, so he rolled over to face away from the windows of his room and let himself go back to sleep. He told himself that maybe it was bled over from some dream, something from a nightmare or another intangible thing between sleep and wakefulness that felt real. Then he let his eyes drift closed and went back to sleep. For a couple of days, he even believed that it was all it was until it happened again. On that night, his body had shot him straight up into a sitting position in the middle of a dead sleep. Because what? He hadn't been sure. He ran the back of his hand over his right eye, trying to rub the sleep away from the edges of his mind so he could figure out what had woken him up. This time it clicked faster, the sensation of eyes on him stronger, the feeling of something nearby striking him harder because it was the foot of his bed. He jerked his eyes open, pulled his head up from his chest with slow movements, and caught something with the edge of his eye. The ghost of a form, nothing he could nail down, maybe a glimmer of white and black with a vague body shape. It wasn't much, but it was enough that he opened his eyes wide to see if it was real, fluttered his eyelids, and then pushed them as wide open as they'd go to see. There was nothing there when he did, nothing he could see in that moment anyway. He sat up straight in bed all the same, his body and mind wide awake now that he'd been pushed into consciousness by that vague edge of something tangible. He flipped on the lamp by his bed and tossed his feet out and onto the floor. Then Bobby Jean stood and made himself walk across the width of the room to look at the area between his bed and the door. Checked under bed with his body bent nearly in half, with his palms on his knees. And even after a long internal battle between rational and irrational thought, jerked his head up to scan the outside area of his window with his whole body alive with alarm and an almost painful alertness. Once again, there was nothing, not beyond the trees and plants that were there. Nevertheless, he couldn't sleep after that. Bobby Jean knew it as he stood there and stared out of his bedroom window in nothing but his boxer shorts and a tank top, as if it was somehow imperative that he saw something. Nothing became apparent, no matter how much he looked, not even with his eyes squinted just so, as he sometimes did when looking at things in the woods. So he made himself walk away, slipped into the bathroom to relieve himself and quietly flush, then went into the kitchen. He made some coffee and drank it black as he waited for the morning to catch up with him as he sipped. The job he had later that morning hadn't gotten his best energy or the focus he managed. It went on like that for a while. Odd feelings and strange impressions in the night. Interrupted sleep woke him at odd hours, nearly always between 2 and 6 in the morning, and left him tired enough that he might be half dreaming, though he was awake. A minimal effect on his work as a guide and all-around woodsman for hire, at least from the outside. But he felt the lack of good rest and its benefits while all of this went on. The lack of sleep and sudden alertness in the night made him ask himself if he was simply tackling another bout of hypervigilance. But if this was the case, then why? Hadn't he done a great deal of work to get over what he'd been through? He certainly hadn't felt those triggers for a long time, and he'd been doing well with his breathing and taking time for himself for a while now. Hadn't he left his father's death in the past? Was his abuser too old and incapacitated to hurt him now? Weren't he and Andy relatively adjusted adults despite those things? Wasn't he pretty well settled with the idea Zed was out of the picture, and it had nothing to do with him no matter what his mind told him? A part of him was angry at the intrusion, particularly if it was all just his mind playing tricks or pulling up old traumas again. The irritability sometimes showed as he interacted with his clients, He even began to ask himself if maybe he needed to head back to therapy for an evaluation or some further work so he could get back to just living. But doing that meant approaching some things he wasn't ready to yet. And he hated to waste time and money on anything that felt like it wasn't necessary. It would have also meant having to establish a whole new relationship with a brand new counselor when he was already under more stress than he could manage well. Forming new bonds felt like asking to be screwed over. He remembered well how hard it had been to find a counselor that matched his needs and work-life schedule. The what-ifs were already driving him up a tree. I am going to leave that there. I suggest you check out that book as it's sounding really good. So, right, thank you so much for Amanda M Lyons for lending me her book. We will be back next week with Necro Sutra Volume 2. So, hit subscribe, and I will see you then. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Subscribe. Oh, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Hit subscribe. Yay. Hit subscribe. Subscribe.